Greetings all and welcome to our 10th first phase exercise class for the English exam for the CACD. We now, as we've seen in the past 9 classes, we have a format of 5 questions, and they're usually mixed between some old TPS questions and some new original questions, which I made up myself. And hopefully they are in line with the actual exam. And before we begin this list, this new questions list, I would just like to remind you that now, since CESP is no longer the examiner for the CACD, we now have IADES again since the previous year. Now this year again, the only thing, the format is still the same, basically the same. Still have 9 questions, 4 items each question, and right or wrong. Still the case. So, but the only difference now is regarding points. Before, for CESP, every wrong answer would entail that you would lose 0.25. So other than only just losing the not receiving the 0.25 of a right answer, you would also lose another 0.25. Now you only lose 0.125, which is half. So now if you get all the items wrong, you only get minus 0.5 or half a question wrong. Before and during CESP time and the CACD, you would lose 0.1. You would lose 1 point completely. So now that doesn't change very much the dynamics of the exam. It might just make you a little bit more bold and might want to guess an item or two. I would still recommend you don't do that, especially in the vocab questions where you don't know the word at all. Just leave it blank. The safest bet is still just leave it blank. Okay, so with that little notice, we will begin this week's 5 questions. All right, this first text was about a English translator to Graciliano Ramos' works, and here he discusses Graciliano himself translating the works from French to Portuguese from Albert Camus, The Plague. So this is a nice text about a translator, talking about a translator who's also one of the premier novelists of Brazil. So I thought it was very interesting, very in line with what the CACD usually asks of the candidate. As I always say, as I said in previous lists, the CACD also tries to test your background culture. All right, so here it's testing if you know a little bit about Graciliano Ramos, also Camus as well, maybe. So here it might help you to know the background of these authors beforehand. I know it's almost impossible to know, but it's good to know this beforehand because it makes it easier, especially for the reading interpretation questions. Okay, so let's begin. As one of Brazil's best regarded novelists in a time when publishers wanted to bring more contemporary foreign literature to the Brazilian reading public, Graciliano Ramos was commissioned to translate The Plague, though his name wouldn't appear in the book itself until the 2nd edition. Ramos was originally reluctant. He in fact didn't think much of Camus' writing, finding it too ornate, but he needed the money, as usually happens with authors in Brazil. His solution was to retool the novel, sentence by sentence, in the image of his own chiseled prose to effectively, as the critic Claudio Veiga put it, treat Camus' novel as though it were an early draft of one of his own. It was no more rigorous than the process he used for his original prose, which he, no surprise, described in terms of hygiene. As he famously said in a 1948 interview, writing should be done the way Alagoan laundry women do their work. They start with an initial washing, wetting the dirty clothes at the edge of a pond or stream, wringing out the cloth, wetting it again, and then wringing it out, then again wringing it. They blew it and soap it and wring it once, twice. After rinsing it, they wet it again, this time by throwing water on it. They beat the cloth on a slab or rock, then wringing it again and again, wringing it until not a single drop of water drips from the cloth. Only after having done all of this do they hang the clean clothes on the wash line to dry. Scrub it, pound it, hang it out to dry. That apparently was his translation approach as well. It couldn't help no I couldn't help noting that a certain irony reading all this as his translator. I was always motivated in large part to translate Ramos into English because I felt he'd been ill-served by translators insufficiently respectful of his stylistic exactitude. And now, here he was radically modifying a French novelist who was equally deliberate in his stylistic choices. Carrying on. But none of Graciliano Ramos' translations present present company obviously included, have been among their nation's premier novelists. So when we ask what Ramos was doing, shrinking Camus' sentences like a mad laundress, reshaping them to his own constricted vision, we need to remember that that's as if a late career Faulkner, to whom Ramos has often been compared for his stark illuminations of an isolated region, were translating him. We'd likely be unsurprised by the hubris and curious about the result. Many dogs are shot in the plague, cats too, but it's when the rats start reappearing, scurrying from place to place, busy with their business, and the townsfolk of Iran realize life as they knew it is once more resuming. Toward the end of the plague, Oran's citizens threw themselves outside in this breathless minute when the time of suffering was about to end and the time of forgetting not yet begun. There was dancing everywhere. The old smells of grilled meats and unseen liquor rose in the fine, soft light falling on the town. All around him, smiling faces turned up toward the sky, right? So it's a fairly long text with, I think the vocab is pretty straightforward. There's a lot of imagery as well because this is of course, even though it's not a literary piece, it's talking about an author, so it uses a lot of metaphors, especially the laundress metaphor here and other things, but the vocab is pretty straightforward. I've seen harder texts, especially that Virginia Woolf text of 2015 that we covered in a past class. I thought was a bit harder in terms of description, as a more descriptive text. Usually when it's a literature-based text like George Orwell or Virginia Woolf, it's very descriptive. And some of the words you don't commonly use in everyday life. So it's harder to understand the vocab. But in this case, I think it's a bit more straightforward. So now beginning with the typical TPS interpretation question, reading interpretation question, which sometimes disguises itself as a vocab question, as I mentioned before in a few classes. Let's begin with question number 1. All right. According to the text, Camus' impenetrable prose made Graciliano Ramos reluctant to translate his work. And this one is obviously wrong. It wasn't his impenetrable prose. Graciliano Ramos had a certain prejudice towards his work because he thought it was too ornate, maybe too colorful, I guess. Not that it was impenetrable. Self-impenetrable means it was incomprehensible almost, and that wasn't the case. So this exaggerates a little bit what he thinks. He thought it was ornate. Ornate does not mean impenetrable. Okay. All right, so question number 1 is wrong. Now moving on to question number 2. It can be said from the text that Graciliano Ramos revealed his role in the translation of The Plague only in the novel's 2nd edition. And this one is wrong, and this one is trying to trick you because it does mention something about 2nd edition here, that his name was only made public in the 2nd edition. In the 1st edition of his translation, his name wasn't printed in the book as an official translator. So if you read this quickly, you're under pressure doing the TPS, you read this quickly, oh yeah, right. But if you just sit for a second and read it, the question for 5 seconds, you would notice it's not exactly that. And when the interpretation here is not exactly what is in the text, it's wrong. All right. So it can be said from the text that Graciliano revealed his role. No, it wasn't him. We don't know if he only wanted to reveal it in the second edition or if it was the publishing company who wanted to reveal it. So we don't know that. So it's wrong. It's not, it can't be said from the text. Okay. All right. We don't know if it was his intentions or not, or if it was the publishing companies or not. We can't tell by the text. Okay. All right. Moving on to question 3. See, these questions are easy. The author states that Graciliano Ramos employed a similar writing process to the translations as to his own works. Okay. And this is correct. Here we can see where was it? Here we go. As the critic Claudio Veiga put it, treat Camus' novels as Graciliano Ramos treated Camus' novels as though it were an early draft of his own. So he would try to follow the same process as he did with his own. Ironically, when he did that, he changed Camus' novels because he was trying to tailor-made it to his own style, but he treated it as his own, almost. All right, so this one is correct. So he employed a similar writing process. Okay. So Ramos mirthfully altered the work of Camus, a novelist regarded as having a very measured style and very measured and clear-cut style. All right, and this is correct. And here was basically a vocab question disguised as a reading interpretation question, because here basically the only word that changed from the original sentence was mirthfully. Okay. So here, if we go back, I don't know where it is right now. And now here he was radically modifying a French novelist who was equally deliberate in his stylistic choices. Okay, so here basically what this question wants you to know is what mirthfully is. If we go to the Cambridge Dictionary, which I recommend that you do, let's go see exactly what mirthfully means and see if it fits in the sentence. If you go for mirthful, full of mirth. So here we can see in the Cambridge Dictionary, mirthfully would be someone full of joyness, happiness, and gladness. Somebody who would be glad to do something, or somebody very merrily doing something. So if we go back to our question here, this was supposed to be right, but now I'm rethinking this one. I think I would go into with a annulation, annul the question, because I see that you can't tell from the original text that Ramos was joyfully altering the work of Camus. So here, the tendency would be to be wrong, because here you see he's radically modifying a French novelist, which is curious, as the author says here, because Ramos also was very measured in his style and has his own way, and he thought that other translators weren't translating Ramos's work correctly because they didn't follow his same style. And here was Ramos translating and changing Camus' original text to fit his own style. So it's very ironic. But we can't tell by the text that Ramos was doing this gladfully or merrily. So this one, you'll see in the there in the answer sheet, answer key, it's going to be right, but I will annul this because you can't tell. All right, so question 1, number 4, annul it. Maybe update the answer key later, okay? But annul this, all right? So if you got this one wrong, take it out of the count, okay? All right, number 2, another vocab question. This is entirely a vocab question. So in text 1, without altering the general meaning of the word chiseled, written in bold, it could be replaced by 1, carved, carved. And if we go back here, we will see chiseled here. His solution was to retool the novel, sentence by sentence, in the image of his own chiseled prose, to effectively, as the critic Claudio Vega put it, to treat Camus' novel as though it were an early draft of one of his own. And this is correct. The chisel means to have sharp features and stuff. So when you chisel something, you're chiseling, you're making it almost like a sculpture, very defined lines, very defined face, or this defined shapes, all right? So when you say somebody has a chiseled face, like happened, I think, in the Virginia Woolf text, I think it means the same thing. They have very definite features and stuff. So with this definition, we can see that 1, carved, in essence, yes. Carved could mean chiseling something, like chiseling a sculpture, could be carved. Okay, that is correct. Say, if we check here in the answer key, we will see that 1 is correct. Okay. Gouged, number 2, is a word that is less known. If we go to the dictionary, we see here gouged. A gouge is also a chisel with a round blade. So with a gouge, you can also sculpt things. So when something is gouged, I mean it was sculpted, it was chiseled the same way. So it's almost a synonym of chiseled. So that one is correct. And if you go with dense, dense has nothing to do with chiseling anything. So dense is clearly incorrect here. And this one was easy. This one was for you to get some points, all right? And number 4, fretted, again, is a synonym, again, of carved, of gouged, and of chiseled. So basically, sometimes what they do is they go to the dictionary, get a word, see synonyms, antonyms, and put it there to see if you know. Sometimes it can all be correct or be wrong, all right? And just one right, like in this case, one wrong, like in this case here. So usually there's a ton of synonyms that just want to see if you know what the word means, all right? They literally just open the dictionary and go and see, oh, let's see the synonyms of this word, basically is what they do. Okay, so nothing too difficult in this question, all right? Moving on, question number 3, considering the grammatical and semantic aspects, so there might be some grammar, and also mixed in again with reading interpretation questions. So it's usually this. There's never a so purely grammar question. This is mostly is vocab, reading interpretation questions. All right. Number 1, the word ill-served could be correctly replaced by impaired without altering the meaning of the passage. Let's read the passage. All right. I felt he had been ill-served by translators insufficiently respectful of his stylistic exactitude. So ill-served does not mean, where is it? Does not mean, number 3, does not mean impaired. Ill-served, it's like it sounds almost. He was not correctly translated, or there weren't people with sufficient knowledge enough of his styles, so he was ill-served to correctly translate his work. It wasn't impaired, right, by other translators. They were just not correctly translating his work. It wasn't impaired. Impaired means completely stops. There's no way possibly to translate his work, and which is not the case. All right. The adjective stark could be replaced by abrupt in this particular context. And this is an interesting question, because if we look at stark, In the dictionary, again, so having stark could be clearly distinguished, a sharp contrast or a sharp thing like that, a very severe contrast or something very severe, very hard. Okay. But in this case, so abrupt could in some circumstances be a synonym for, could serve as a synonym for stark. But here, because could be something severe. So when you think of something abrupt, something severe. But in this case, it's using the term stark to contrast, not to show abruptness. All right, here's the contrast. There's a sharp contrast, not an abrupt illumination. Okay, it's trying to show contrast and not a sudden stop of movement. Okay, as abrupt would mean. So in this particular context, and that's very important, because if you look at the dictionary, in some contexts, it could be replaced. But in this particular context, so always pay attention to phrases like this in the questions. It cannot be translated correctly. It cannot be replaced. All right. The expression scurry from place to place could be replaced by running to and fro without altering the meaning of the sentence. And this is correct. This is again just to test your vocab. If you know what to and fro means, you can guess by it. So, excuse me, I fell into my own trap here. Running from place to place does not necessarily mean that you're going from there to here. Because when you say to and fro, you're going back and forth from the same place, going to the same place, going from A to B, back to A again, going from A to B, and going back to A again. So same 2 points. When it's going from place to place, it's more anarchic. It's more general. It could be going from A to C to E to F, D. So from place to place. So it's a very nuanced here, nuanced meaning here, difference in meanings, but you can't change it directly because it changes the meaning. It alters the meaning of the sentence here, so you can't do it. Okay, so just to confirm here, if we go back here to 3, it's wrong. Okay, I'm sorry, I fell into my own trap. It's incorrect. The number 4, question 3, number 4. The expression after rinsing it the expression after rinsing it could be replaced by after drying it without altering the meaning of the sentence. And that's completely incorrect. Rinsing means removing soap or removing the chemicals that you put to clean it, to clean something. When you rinse it out, you're removing all the soap and everything else, maybe the fats, everything. You're not drying it. When you dry it, you're removing the water, the humidity. Here, you're just removing soaps and stuff. You're not drying it, so you can't change the meaning. Okay. Now moving on to text 2. This comes from the 2018 CNCD, and it's a bit shorter, a lot shorter actually. And let's begin. With this report, our aim is to present initial reflections on diplomacy in the digital age. In the ongoing debate amongst international relations scholars, information and communication technologies, ICT experts, digital strategists, social media advocates, and others, the first question for us is, what is happening to diplomacy? And the obvious answer is what has always happened to it. Diplomacy is responding to changes in the international and domestic environments, in the main centers of authority, particularly states, and in the character of societies at home and abroad. Newness in diplomacy today has everything to do with the application of communications technologies to diplomacy. This issue goes right to the heart of diplomacy's core functions, including negotiation, representation, and communication. Given the centrality of communications in diplomacy, it's hardly surprising that the rise of social media should be of interest to practitioners of diplomacy. Most of them, like people outside diplomatic culture, are in the process of adjusting their analog habits and finding their own voice in a new information sphere. This takes time, and for technological enthusiasts to simply proclaim the arrival of a new statecraft in the form of what is variously termed e-diplomacy, digital diplomacy, cyber diplomacy, and twin diplomacy is too simplistic. Paradoxically, greater complexity encourages shallow, hurried analysis and the search for simple explanations about what is happening to diplomacy as a regulating mechanism of the societies of states. And in other epochs of fast technological change, the lure of quick fixes addressing multifaceted processes of change in diplomacy appears almost irresistible. So here, moving on to question 1, question 4, item 1. For the authors, the changes brought about by new communication technologies are affecting the essence of diplomacy as never before. And this is incorrect, of course. As if we go back to the text, we see that and obvious, the answer is what has always happened to it. Diplomacy is responding to changes in international domestic environments. Okay. So this is something that you always happen to diplomacy. It always had to adapt to new environments, all right? So nothing new under the sun, as we would say. Now, question 2. The text lists 3 different kinds of changes which affect diplomacy. Those originated in international and domestic scenarios, correct. Those coming from the main centers of authority, correct. And the ones which are related to societal transformations, correct. So all 3 are correct. You can directly in the text. So this one is correct. Pure reading interpretation questions here. No vocab to be seen so far. Okay, number 3. Due to the close relationship that exists between diplomacy and communication, diplomats have managed to bring their communicative skills to perfection in order to work autonomously with new digital media. No, they're still adapting, and the word here, perfection, is too strong. Every time you see like all of the diplomats or they have completed or it's perfect or something, everything that's too radical, just pay attention to it. Usually not the case, especially in a text like this. Diplomats also still adapting. They didn't use their communicative skills to perfection in order to autonomously work in the new digital age. Okay, so this one is incorrect. The word perfection is a telltale sign that this question is wrong, right? Moving to 4. The authors are critical of the kind of explanation analysts have given for the phenomenon of diplomacy in the digital age, which according to the authors should be approached more thoroughly. And this one is incorrect also. The authors are critical of the kind of explanation analysis. Let's see, did they say thoroughly? Paradoxically, greater comparisons encourage shallow, hurried analysis and search for simple explanations what is happening to diplomacy as a regulating mechanism of society and states. Okay. So here, with this new digital age, new media, we have more superficial, hurried information with less depth in analysis, okay? And this is talking about the actual analysis done by about analysts in the digital age, not about the role of diplomacy itself. Okay, so the authors are not critiquing that. Okay, so another point. All right, so moving on to question 5. Let's see here. In the first paragraph, the words ongoing an advocate can be correctly and respectively replaced by far-reaching and lawyers without changing the meaning of this passage. Let's go here. In the ongoing debate, meaning the debate that on goes, meaning it's far-reaching, it can go far into the future, all right, or far into various topics as well. Into the ongoing debate amongst international relations scholars and information technology experts, digital strategists, and media advocates. Advocates can also be translated to lawyers, although advocates can be in the general sense of anybody who supports a cause and is an activist of any cause. But it can be translated to lawyers. I don't agree with this so much, but in the answer key for them, it says correct. And lawyers can be advocates, but it doesn't change the meaning. But advocates is more general than lawyers, because lawyers is usually the profession lawyers. Lawyers are advocates, but there are other types of advocates other than lawyers. So I don't necessarily agree with this answer key, but it says it's correct, and we have to follow what CESP said, right? Okay, moving on to the passage, what has always happened to it can be correctly replaced by what has always happened to it, which means that, or by what has happened to it, which is to say, what has always happened to it. Well, yeah, and the answer key says is correct, but here it's a bit confusing, this item. I would go back to it and see. The passage which has always happened to it can be correctly replaced by what has always happened to it. Okay, we're back. I think we had a few technical issues, but no worries. So here back to our question. The passage of what has always happened to it can be correctly replaced by what has always happened to it, which means that, or by what has always happened to it, which is to say, the question is something odd. I think I might copied it wrong incorrectly there, but this is odd. It's correct in the answer key. All right, let's go back to this question. I will go back later and give you an update on it. Question 5, item number 3. In the end of the second paragraph, okay, the author expresses the opinion that the so-called new statecraft, also known as digital diplomacy, is too simplistic. All right, and this one is incorrect. If we go to the end of the second paragraph, this takes time and for technological enthusiasts to simply proclaim the arrival of a new statecraft in the form of what is variously termed e-diplomacy, digital diplomacy, cyber diplomacy. Okay, it's far too simplistic. Okay. And not the new statecraft and digital diplomacy is too simplistic, but the arrival, to proclaim the arrival of this new statecraft is something that is too simplistic. Not the new statecraft itself, but it's the proclamation of its arrival is simplistic, right? So it's something very fine there. So it's to proclaim it that it has arrived already, that's simplistic, not the fact itself that is simplistic. Okay. And number 4, the passage of the lure of the quick fixes addressing multifaceted processes of change could be replaced by the temptation of finding easy solutions for manifold processes of change, and this will help to keep the paragraph coherent. All right, so you have vocab there, and also thinking about coherence. And vocab-wise is correct, and it maintains the same coherence, because the temptation of finding easy solutions, quick fixes for manifold, multifaceted. So it's correct. This one last is correct. Okay. So thank you very much for watching this video and watching this 10th class. If you have any questions again, please let me know via my email, write me an email, and I will answer you very shortly. All right, very quickly. Okay. So thank you very much, and see you next week for class number 11.